Daniel, chapters number 1 through 7. We're going to give an overview and cover some of the details of chapter 1 through 7 thus far in the book of Daniel. And just to try to bring us back up to speed, and we're going to zoom out a little bit and look at the book of Daniel, the first half of the book of Daniel and chapter number 7. We can see the book of Daniel started out with chapter number 1, and it talks about Nebuchadnezzar and the eating of the king's meat. But chapter number 2 focuses on one of the visions. Each one of the visions in the book of Daniel all represents a changing of world rulers or empires. And God showed this. Now, if we look at this, Daniel chapter number 2, the king Nebuchadnezzar saw the great statue of gold. We remember the statue with the head of gold, the arms of silver, brass, the loins, legs of iron, and feet and toes of iron mixed with clay. And we understand that these were the 4 world governments, Gentile ruling governments that will rule the earth. And this vision was first given to whom else but the head Nebuchadnezzar. So now, if we move on, if we go back over to our chart that we have, the next vision that we actually see is in chapter number 4. And right here, Nebuchadnezzar has his great dream of where he is the tree, and the tree was going to be hewed down or cut off. And once again, Nebuchadnezzar was going to be cut down. But Nebuchadnezzar was very blessed because he is the only one that was cut down, but through the mercies of God regained his kingdom. And like we suggested before, we believe this is probably because of the prophet Daniel probably was interceding continually to God for the king. So let's move on. Now, the next changing of the guard, or changing of world rulers, is chapter number 5, where Belshazzar has the vision of the handwriting on the wall. We remember Belshazzar, how he was so prideful with his guests and how they went and got the holy vessels out and was partying with God's holy vessels, the ones that God had dedicated when the cloud came down and filled the tabernacle with Moses. And then he saw this handwriting on the wall. This is Hebrew to our left. And then this is the English, of course, on our right. And we can see that there was clearly a changing of world powers. Now, if we continue on, chapter number 7, we have another vision, Daniel's vision of the 4 great beasts coming out of the sea. Now, if we take a look at that, as we know, once again, this is Daniel's more detailed version of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar saw. This is more in line to what's going on in the spirit realm, because as we can see in the book of Revelation, the Apostle John saw a composite of this, which is telling us what Daniel saw and what John saw are much more spiritually accurate, given that type of perspective, as opposed to what the king of Babylon actually saw. So now, but let's take a look at this And we're going to notice some really interesting things. With every changing of the guard, there has always been some type of war. As we can go back, we can see chapter number 7. When Belshazzar, we remember Belshazzar, how he was partying, and then the Medes and the Persians actually came in and took over. And if we go back to chapter number 2, we can see where Nebuchadnezzar saw his great vision. We remember he took over Jerusalem and the world empires through conquest. And that's how he rose to power. And we can see the same thing with chapter number 4. And something else we would notice also in chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, we have visions intermingled with history. We can see that back and forth with what's going on in the book of Daniel. And also we see something else that's going on back and forth in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel starts out in the Hebrew language, but in the middle or slightly at the beginning of chapter number 2, verses 1, 2, and 3 are still in Hebrew, but verses 4 throughout are in the Aramaic tongue. And we explain why was that, because in chapter number 2, verse number 4, the magician spoke to the king in Aramaic at that time. So this is a changing in Daniel's mind. You see, when Daniel wrote the book of Daniel, he pretty much broke the book of Daniel up into 3 major sections, and they are right here. The Hebrew language up until chapter number 2, verses 1, 2, 3. And then everything after that is in Aramaic at that point. All the way up to where we are right now. Chapter number 8. Chapter number 8, the book of Daniel goes back to the Hebrew language from the Aramaic. And we know that there are a few scriptures in the middle that a few scriptures that are Greek, but for the most part, it's the Aramaic language. So you can plainly see that Daniel grouped these this way. And something else, like we said, chapters 1 through 6 are all flowing in logical order, chronological order. From chapter 7 on, the chronological order disappears out of the book of Daniel. Things are grouped according to visions, because we can take a look at it. Chapter number 8, Daniel sees the vision of the ram and the he-goat in the 3rd year of Belshazzar. Okay, let's go back to chapter number 7. And then chapter number 7, in the 1st year of Belshazzar, okay, Daniel sees the vision of the 4 great beasts. Now that makes sense, but take a look at what happens. Chapter number 6, we are in the reign of Darius the Mede. And when we go back to chapter number 5, we are in the reign of Belshazzar. You see, we go from Belshazzar to Darius, back to Belshazzar, and back to Belshazzar again. You can plainly see from chapter 7, 8, 9, when we look at the rest of these visions, they are arranged logically or spiritually, as chapters 1 through and 6 are arranged chronologically. A lot of people believe the book of Daniel, before Daniel died, he went back and rewrote the book and organized it. There are sayings that the book of Daniel is probably one of the most organized books in the Old Testament or the Tanakh. And we can plainly see there's a logical, logistic flow to what the prophet Daniel was doing here. God, in the name of Jesus, we thank you. We ask that you give revelation, spirit, and knowledge, and let your will be done and let your kingdom come. Thank God.